This is episode 278 of the Books, Shows, Tunes, and Mad Acts podcast. This episode is titled Two Novels with Christina Hoag. Welcome to Books, Shows, Tunes, and Mad Acts. I'm your host, Jennifer Crittenden. Books, Shows, Tunes, and Mad Acts is brought to you by The Discreet Guide, the coaching and training company for improving your speaking and writing skills, with a special focus on mastering English and advancing your career. Let's get you to where you want to go. On with the show, and thank you for joining me today. I am so pleased to welcome a new guest to the show today. I have Christina Hoag with me, an author. So welcome to the show, Christina.
No, thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. We're going to talk about two books that Christina has written. She's written more than that, but the two that I read were Law of the Jungle and Skin of Tattoos, and we'll talk about them in that order. But first, I want to read Christina's bio, and bear with me here. She has a fulsome background. And so I want to read a fairly long bio for our listeners. She's a former journalist who has had her laptop searched by Colombian guerrillas, phone tapped in Venezuela, was suspected of drug trafficking in Guyana, hid under a car to evade Guatemalan soldiers, and posed as a nun to report from inside a Caracas jail. She's interviewed gang members, bank robbers, thieves and thugs in prisons, shantytowns, and slums, not to forget billionaires and presidents, some of whom fall into the previous categories. Now she writes about such characters in her fiction. Her most recent work is Law of the Jungle, a psychological thriller. Her noir crime novel, Skin of Tattoos, was a finalist for the Silver Falchion Award for Suspense, while her novel Girl on the Brink was named one of Suspense Magazine's best for young adults. She co-authored the nonfiction book Peace in the Hood, working with gang members to end the violence, used as a textbook at UCLA, University of California, and other academic institutions. Her short stories and essays have won several awards and have been published in numerous anthologies and literary journals, including Black Cat Mystery Magazine, Lunch Ticket, Shooter, Other Side of Hope, and Toasted Cheese. She is a former staff writer for the Miami Herald and Associated Press and reported from 14 countries around Latin America for Time, Business Week, New York Times, Financial Times, Sunday Times of London, Houston Chronicle, and other news outlets. A graduate cum laude of Boston University, she won 2 prizes from the New Jersey Press Association in her newspaper career. She was born in New Zealand and grew up as an expat in 7 countries, arriving in the United States as a teenager. She now lives in Los Angeles, where she's taught creative writing at a maximum security prison and to at-risk teen girls. She's a regular speaker at women's conferences, writing conferences and organizations, book clubs, and stores and libraries. All right. So yes, welcome very much. And let's start off talking about Law of the Jungle. So the main character, Rowena, is a brilliant, eccentric biochemist who has dedicated her life to studying a spider venom that could cure erectile dysfunction. When she meets Guy Westerfall, a charismatic entrepreneur who offers to fund her research and her dream of saving the Amazon, she falls madly in love. How did you come up with this story?
Well, I've always been fascinated by jungles, and I lived in Latin America for almost 10 years and, didn't extensively go into jungles, but I went into a number of jungles, and they're very, inhospitable habitats, and they make, of course, great hideouts for things like narco traffickers and guerrillas. And there's a lot of nefarious things that go on in jungles just because they're so hard to reach. So, being that I write noir and crime sort of stuff, I really wanted to set something in a jungle. So I ended up somehow, I don't remember how, but I came across the spider that I use in Law of the Jungle. Is a real spider. It's called a Brazilian wandering spider. And it does have a venom that if it bites men, they can get a very long-lasting and painful erection. It is not a fatal by any means, but can obviously cause quite a bit of discomfort. And it has been studied as an ED sort of thing, by a big pharma has gone down there, and a lot of other things in the Amazon too, medicinal plants and trees and all that sort of stuff. So, and I thought, wow, what a great thing to use.
Right? Sure. Yeah.
So I sort of, I somehow cobbled together this story of this really odd woman with a very strange background from England. My mother's from England, from Devon, which is right next to Cornwall. Rowena's from Cornwall. And then obviously she's a researcher, and she's down there sort of hiding from the world, really. Mm-hmm. She's punishing herself for things in England and to get away from her mother and all this stuff. But she's also become sort of, I guess you would call it autistic. I didn't really set out to, but sort of Asperger-like, not very socially skilled. And of course, she's alone, a lot in the jungle. That was sort of the impetus for the story, and I based it on places I'd been to in the Venezuelan Amazon. Yeah,
and the character of Guy Westerfall also a very strong character. How did you come up with him?
Well, we had to have a villain, and, he had to be charismatic. And of course, he comes along and sees Rowena as a very vulnerable target, and she's got some very valuable research that he can make quite a bit of money off. So he sets out to do that by wooing her, and she falls right into his his designs, because she's so starved for affection and human companionship, basically. So that's how it came. And it was sort of modeled really a lot on a bad boyfriend I had too. So there was an element of that we wove into the Guy character.
I see. Yes, because he's very effective as a bad guy and a bad boyfriend. So yeah, I'm not surprised that there was some reality behind that. Yeah, it's funny actually now that you're talking, because he really does prey on her. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which right. All mixed up in this environment of the jungle, but she is vulnerable. And as a reader, I felt very protective of her. So you did a really good job with that. And then, I was very mad at Guy for taking advantage of this woman in that situation. So yeah, the setup is really good for readers, right? We're very engaged. And there's a lot of science in the book too, which was very engaging. And you mentioned that you enjoy doing the research for the book. So yeah, tell me how you did the research and what did you discover?
Well, it was just basically the internet. The novelist's best friend is the internet. You just look up stuff, and I just, as I said, I had come across the spider, and then I also came across the golden dart frog in Colombia and looked up where that was. And of course, without giving away too much of the plot, but anyway, Rowena ends up spending a chunk of time after her betrayal by Guy in Colombia. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to work in some guerrilla stuff. As I said, there's so much going on in the jungle that people don't really know about. And one of them is guerrilla activity and narco activity. So I wove that in, and then I had to make, find some medicinal plants, because she's very well versed in all that sort of medicinal plants, which of course was her mother in England who knew about plants and cures and poisons. So that forms part of her backstory, and it also makes her useful to the guerrillas,
right?
So she can actually serve some use to them and becomes like, this go-to person in their camp of healing wounded, soldiers and whatnot. But I just had to look up stuff that would be in that area of the jungle and, things that would be found there and things like that, and just make a list and sort of check how it was used and, just do a lot of things. So I had to, actually ended up reading some research papers I found, different things, some sort of more laid touristy type things, but also some more in-depth research papers on the poison of the golden poison dart frog and some other things. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel as though there's a growing interest in understanding plants and what they can do. Or maybe I'm kind of interested in it. And so I'm noticing these things more around me. Yeah. So I was curious if that was an interest of yours before you wrote the book about using plants for natural medicine.
Not particularly, actually. Nothing really that I'd studied or taken an active sort of interest or hobby in. Just for the book, really, and just different ways you could use the natural environment around there. And there's tons of stuff in the jungle, of course. And living, I lived in Venezuela, and sort of you heard about different things. And of course, people live off, that's how they live, is with medicinal bark and, shrubs and all these sort of things. That is their medicine that they use. So there's definitely use to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I wanted to read your bio because I think it's an indication of kind of your varied interests, right? That you have traveled a lot, you've done a lot of different kinds of things. But I was thinking as I was listening to you talk, this is a really curious person. Like you just strike me as someone who's very curious about things, so interested in learning about things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why I love doing the research. I love to travel. I really do love going, and I end up going down the rabbit hole, start going down. I was like, oh God, I got to stop here, cut it off, get back to writing or, refocus. Because it is fascinating, all these different things you can find out. And as I said, the internet is just a, bottomless repository of things. But I love learning about all different things and writing about different things. So, you have to makes you learn different things.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's definitely a side benefit of being a writer is that you get to learn all the things that you're interested in writing about. Right. We get to play a lot, go down those rabbit holes, as you say. The sense of place, both in the Amazon and in Colombia, was very strong in this book. And I was curious if you decided to go back to visit while you were writing, or if you were just drawing on your memory, or a little of both, or how that worked.
I didn't go back. I was drawing on my memory, but to refresh my memory, I watched different videos on YouTube or, a movie or anything set in the jungle just to refresh my mind again, or look at photos. I did look at quite a few photos and things of like towns in the jungle and how they were set up and what the buildings were made of and things like that. They're usually by a river. I mean, they're almost always on a river. There's not much of a jetty or anything. They pull the boats right into the shore, the sandy shore and things like that. But I did, study quite a bit, some towns in the Venezuelan Amazon to see what the roads were made out of, what the buildings, looked like, things like that, what businesses were there, how they were reached, it's by air, usually it's by air and by river, sometimes there's no roads. And I looked at, different things about what the indigenous tribes how they live down there as well, in different types of huts, and housing situations and what they, how they live, the women usually do the farming, the gathering and stuff. Men go off and hunt, come back with monkeys or, what have you to eat. So I did study, look into all that quite a bit as to how to fashion my particular scenes.
One thing that was particularly strong for me, or that I developed a strong image of, is of Rowena's camp. And had you ever seen a camp like that, of a scientist working down there or someone living on their own like that?
I really hadn't, but I'd seen camps of indigenous tribes, sort of similar with these just, huts. So I set it up like that, and I figured she would have a little pavilion, sort of an open air thatch roof pavilion where she would do her science stuff with wooden benches and a sort of a makeshift kitchen, and she'd have to have an outhouse, sort of back in the woods a bit, things like that. So, and a trail leading to the local tribe, and she had made friends with them, and So she probably she didn't live with them, but she lived a short distance. There was a path going from one to the other and things like that. So I had it all envisioned in my head, in my mind. I could see it.
And now it's in mine. Yeah, no, it was well done. I really enjoyed all of that. Yeah, so tell me from a writing standpoint for our writers out there, did you use particular techniques as you developed those two characters? Did you do character profiles or, how did you, from a mechanical standpoint or a craft standpoint, I should say?
Yeah, I've never been able to do character profiles. They always seemed very contrived to me. So they just developed through drafts. Mm-hmm. So I'd written one draft of it, and then I needed, more explanation or more heft to Rowena's character. What was going to be her arc? Where did she come from? How did she get to be? Who on earth would go off and just live by themselves in the middle of nowhere in this, as I said, very inhospitable environment in the jungle? So what was her backstory? So with each sort of draft, and every time I went through it, I had to add some pieces to her. And, came up with, also I had to show, her character arc had to have a basis in something. And she, when she got angry, she got really angry,
shit.
And of course that came from her mother. Her mother was very vengeful and also a, quote unquote healer, although she often used her medicinal knowledge to evil purposes. So she had this background and she had this underlying current of rage or revenge, because she knew she was, I guess, different. And then, when, especially men, she had a bad experience with a young man at university. So that sort of laid the groundwork, I think, for coming up to Guy. So again, I just had to sort of keep adding the layers. That's really how I did it.
Do you have a sense of how many drafts you did of that book?
Quite a few. It started off as often does with me. It starts off with something else, and then it sort of morphs into this. And again, I just kept blinking. I can't remember how many I did, to be honest.
Well, it's a very interesting book project. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. One last question about Rowena. So, she does change quite a bit during that novel. Especially once she decides that, she's going to wreak revenge for something that happens to her. So for that character arc, did you have that in mind at the beginning, or did that also evolve?
Yeah, that also evolved as well. And it's sort of just, and again, and then I had to come back how she was going to resolve this, revenge and how that was going to work with Guy. And then, take it a step further. So she becomes almost like, regains a sense of balance or humanity in the end. And again, she goes off to yet another jungly place in Borneo. She has to escape and then just sort of settles into a more stable life and comes to terms with herself and her background, her childhood with this abusive mother. Yeah, so it just kept evolving as I was writing.
Yeah, so she kind of evolved as the novel evolved. Yeah, it's a question that comes up a lot in my writing classes and writing groups about how these things develop. Do people develop a whole plot outline first? It seems as though it's often kind of a mix of two things, like people have an idea, but then it just keeps changing as they write.
That's what I find. I mean, I can write out a whole plot and then, it might not even be, that far into it. It starts changing, it just it turns into something else. So it's the outline is there, but it's if it serves, stops serving a purpose at some point, and I just start, moving off into other directions, which sometimes is good, sometimes is also bad, because you can sort of write yourself into a corner, you end up wasting time. But I do think it does, just things do, for me at least, develop as I start writing, especially with character, and then that leads to, more plot things.
Yeah, I think especially with character, right? I just feel like as writers, they get to know their characters better. And so that character becomes more rich and fulsome as they go along. And that doesn't always fit the plot, the story that they had created in their own minds. And I have to believe that the end result is richer and better because of that. That books that are really written from a very strict outline are just, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that works better if you're writing a sort of a thriller, perhaps, or some really plot-driven type of book. If you're working with character, it's just impossible to see your character, how they're going to react in all these different situations, and bringing other characters in and that kind of thing. And then all the details of backstory. Sometimes you need that extra backstory, or too much. You want to cut some out. So I think the outline really works well for plot. It doesn't often, for me at least, work as well for character. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really interesting as we're talking about this, because your work definitely is very character driven. So to talk about Skin of Tattoos. So I just loved your main character. And
so did I. I fell totally in love with Mags.
Yeah. So just for our listeners here, so very different kind of book. So Skin of Tattoos is this crime thriller. It portrays a Salvadoran gang in LA as members battle each other for leadership while fighting rival gangs. And Mags, this character that we both appreciate so much, he's just gotten out of prison, but he finds himself drawn back into his old life and really trapped in his old life with seemingly no way out. And the stakes rising around him as he tries to do the right thing, but everything always seems to turn out wrong for him. What was interesting to me about this book was it really turned into a real page turner for me, which at my advanced age and as much as I've read really doesn't happen to me very often. I've just become a little bit maybe jaded about stories or books. I just don't very often find that I'm reading something that I just, I'm like looking forward to, a certain time of day when I can go read. And that happened to me with your book, Skin of Tattoos. I was extremely curious about how he was going to try and extricate himself from these problems. And I think a lot of it was because I cared so much about Mags. Tell me how you developed him.
Well, that story came out of a reporting assignment I did years ago in El Salvador, and it was about LA gang members who were deported from Los Angeles, from the United States, back to their quote unquote home country, El Salvador, which they had left when they were very small. So small children, babies, infants, toddlers. Some of them really didn't have any recollection of El Salvador. Some of them didn't really speak Spanish, other than a few words. They went to live with relatives they had never met. So they really didn't feel Salvador, and they were fish out of water type thing. And so that was the story that that I went and reported on for a magazine and wrote a magazine story about it. And it just stayed with me. Maybe I related to, because I had moved around a lot as a child from country to country, always feeling fish out of water. You don't quite belong here, not there. So I just thought there was something to write about. And years later, I got to LA and working for the Associated Press, and I was covering actually gangs and inner city issues, that type of thing. Urban issues was part of my beat. So I was covering a lot of this gang prevention and how to, we prevent kids from joining gangs, and how do we, get them out, and those kind of issues. I'd interviewed quite a few gang members, current and, and former, that type of thing. And, I just came up with this character. So, of Mags, as I had seen him through a lot of these young men that I'd interviewed, basically, who were sort of trapped by circumstance, didn't have a lot going for them, got sort of misguided, didn't get a lot of guidance at home, so that they got misguided by people they met on the street who had the flashy cars and all the girls and the bling and the whatnot, and, end up in prison or dead, one or the other, really. So that's really where the character came from. Yeah.
It seems that, he's such a sympathetic character, Right. Even though he does really some quite bad things, which was also interesting to me because I cared so much about him and he's kind of a bad guy, right? I mean, yes, but yeah, it's interesting that we can still feel sympathy. And is that how you felt as you got to know these real life people? Were you sympathetic to them?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I saw them as not beyond the tattoos on their, on their skin, and when you get to know people from a different angle, you can kind of see why why they did the things they did, even though they're terrible things. And you think, it's difficult to reconcile many times too. It's like, how can this person sitting in front of me who looks like, just this normal, nice enough person do all these, have committed a murder, have robbed a bank, held people up at gunpoint, so on and so forth. Yeah, so it's difficult to reconcile that. And I was also fascinated by that dichotomy too, that paradox in human character and human nature. You can seem so, from the outward such a nice person, but yet be capable of doing all this whole other awful things to other people. Mm-hmm. So I tried to make Mags a little less like he wasn't. I wanted to make him simply. He's very protective of his sisters and his mother and of women in general. So I made that as a sort of a redeeming quality in him. Mm-hmm. He's very loyal to his group of homies. And I tried not to make him too violent as personally like stabbing people and stuff like that, even though I'm sure he's done that. But, he ran a chop shop, a car theft ring and chopping up cars for parts and that kind of thing. And slightly roughing up people and that kind of thing. But I tried to not make him super violent.
Yeah, you definitely gave him redeeming qualities and his affection for his family, his desire to be accepted in the family and into the gang, and how much he cares about the other gang members. So in some ways, he's actually a pretty soft-hearted person. He's also, if I have this right, he's actually fairly anti-drug.
Yeah, I made, because I didn't want, there are some, and again, I did a lot of research into gangs and stuff like that. So I made his particular gang have this sort of, no user rule, pot was okay, marijuana, but anything stronger, you're going to get kicked out. But a lot of gang members are, heroin addicts or whatever, meth addicts. So I wanted to kind of steer clear of that too. It just...
Well, and it figures into the plot.
I was making up the rules of my own, rules of my own gang, so I could make up some rules. So
right, yeah.
But again, it's not uncommon. That is a.
I see. This next question was about that readers will often say, or I read this a lot in Amazon reviews, oh, I had to stop reading this book because this character was so unlikable. And so, it's always a quandary, right, for writers about, do we make our characters likable or not likable? And Roxane Gay has an essay about, what we want is interesting characters, not necessarily likable characters, but it depends a lot on the reader, right? And I was thinking that, we're very interested in Mags, and so he's likable in that way. We're sympathetic to him in that way. And I was reminded about my mother saying that she was writing a character who on the surface you'd certainly consider her to be a likable character. I mean, she's a very good person. And my mother said she got to hate her. She said, oh, she was such a little goody two-shoes. So what is likable isn't always easy to define. Right. But yeah. I was curious as you wrote him or other characters, like in terms of whether or not they're likable or good or whatever, which ones did you enjoy writing?
I had fun with one of the homies, Tweety, because I made him funny. He's a little, not the smartest guy on the block. So he would come up with these little one-liners, and everybody would laugh at him, and he would actually enjoy the attention of being laughed at. But so I really actually had fun writing him because he makes these little little funny, jokes. He doesn't mean them as jokes, but they come across as
Oh,
jokes.
I see.
So I sort of had fun writing him, and I did have fun writing Mags. I just loved Mags, and I felt very protective of him. And I even had fun writing the villain Rico. And again, I had to give him. He's pretty messed up, and I had to give him a backstory to explain why, which was this very physically abusive mother who went insane, and then he was raised by an uncle. That would create some sympathy or, some empathy for him and what he had gone through. And then he becomes this sort of very competitive. He sees Mags as a rival. He wants to get him out of the way and lead the gang and that kind of thing. So that, I enjoyed writing that, making him more human, humanizing him as well. But yeah, I enjoyed really all the characters, even the family characters, the other homies. Yeah, I really had I put a lot into that book. I really did.
Yeah, the characters seem very fleshed out in that. And so they're interesting, right? They're all interesting. All of those gang members are interesting. Blue is a very interesting character. And then the relationships that those gang members have with women is a whole other aspect of that book. And I was very interested in the women, in part because they don't have a lot of agency. Their worth seems to come from their connection to the various men, which I think, that does happen to women in certain cultures. So tell me about writing the women.
Yeah, I mean, they're secondary characters. They're obviously not the main characters, but, I had to, Mags has this girlfriend, Paloma, and she gets fed up with being sort of a secret because she's Blue Boy's sister, and they have to go around in secret conducting this romance. So she gets tired of that. And then, he has these two sisters, one of whom he's very close to and who's not very, sort of successful, Lisi, and gets pregnant by a rival gang member. Again, it's reflective of what I had seen in many of these in interviews and from real life. What happens, start having babies, and it doesn't, you then limited. Your choices are so much more limited. And then the mother is trying to keep the family together. She's trying to keep that glue, but she's married to an alcoholic who was scarred in the Civil War in El Salvador, and she's just trying to sort of keep everything together. Her 4 kids and the husband, and then the younger sister, is kind of like a little bit of a bratty, younger teenage. I think she's about 14, I think. I forget how old she is, 13, 14. So she's a bit of a bratty, and she's also a little bit spoiled and overprotected, which I'd also seen in families also. Girls get, she can't go out, or she's, so she has to sneak out. And then when she sneaks out, everything, happens. Bad things happen. And the older brother was also something I've seen. He's the star of the family. He becomes a firefighter. So Mags is constantly in his shadow. Mags is the black sheep. And so there's a lot of rivalry and competition between the two brothers there.
Yeah. So the difference between those two boys is really interesting. My impression was that Mags has a large number of tattoos, but the older brother maybe doesn't.
Yeah, I didn't give him any tattoos at that point. He doesn't have any tattoos. He really is. He's kind of a goody two shoes. He's kind of the goody two shoes of the family. He's the oldest child, so I took the stereotypical oldest child goody who does the best in the family kind of thing, and made that. And then from what I've seen in different families of my own, when you have 2 children of the same sex, there's always rivalry, between 2 girls, 2 boys. So I just took that.
There's a place where he talks about he himself feels trapped in this role of the older brother who always has to, and I thought that was also very eye-opening. And I felt a lot more sympathy for him once he'd kind of complained, I have to do all the work. I have to bring in money. I have the operating car. I mean, I have a lot of stuff. I'd like to run off and have my own life, but I can't because of this role that I have to play.
Yeah, he becomes sort of, because the father is an alcoholic and sort of, he's just in his own fog of alcohol and rage at what happened to him, having to leave his country. That Frank, the older brother, becomes sort of the surrogate father. He steps into that role a little bit, and he's got three younger siblings, so he's sort of herding cats with them, and yeah, and he says it's not that easy either.
Right. Yeah. Different challenges, but also, yeah, he doesn't see his life as some great paradise either. But I was curious about the idea of tattoos, because at some point Mag says, he has these tattoos, he'll never be rid of them, and it will always mark him as a gang member. And I wanted to ask you, tattoos are so prevalent now. Do you feel as though those are now still perceived as a sign of being a gang member, or has that changed over time?
Well, gangs still use those certain tattoos, but even gangs, some actually have gone against tattoos because it does mark them. Mm-hmm. And, law enforcement does use them. They're identifiers,
right.
On somebody's file, they'll have, so-and-so has all these tattoos. Yeah, I mean, they've become definitely far more, more of a trendy and more accepted. Everybody's got them now, women and men and whatnot. So yeah, maybe it's just the type of tattoo. The gang tattoo tends to be the black and white. There's not the colored and different symbols and things like that. There's all symbology and, the name of the gang or the clique and different things.
Oh, I see. I see. Have you studied tattoos very much?
Again, I did research on them. So it is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
What they mean and all that kind of thing. And one of the, the laughing and crying, the Greek, better to live and laugh than cry or something. But, there's different things that, they use, they like.
Yeah. It seems like that would be a whole field of potential learning, is learning all about those tattoos. All right. Let's talk about violence. So there are places in the book that are pretty violent, some pretty violent scenes. So did you have trouble writing those violent scenes? Those come to you pretty easily? Yeah, what you're thinking about that?
Not really. I mean, it was certainly probably not as violent as real life is with gangs, to be honest. But I had to have some violence. I feel that from what you see on the movies, I don't think it's anything worse than you see on TV kind of stuff.
No, I don't.
But I'm sure some readers get turned off by it. But it is a fact of life in that lifestyle. But as I said, I didn't try and make it gory or too graphic or whatever. But I did it for verisimilitude. I had to include some. But yeah, I didn't really have too much of a problem. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Writing those came to you pretty easily as a writer. Mm-hmm. Well, perhaps because you've heard pretty accurate descriptions of it. But yes, I should rush to say for our listeners, no, the violence in the book is not, I would say, particularly explicit. I mean, I continue to be amazed every year at how our TV series just gets more and more violent. I mean, it's just incredible now that things that we see on our television and the scenes in your book are nothing like those. But I thought it was noticeable, just I was curious as a writer how you felt about writing those, if you were comfortable writing those or not. You didn't have a lot of sex scenes. A little bit. There's a little bit of sex.
A little bit, yeah. I tried to soft pedal it, yeah.
But that's also one where writers sometimes are like, writing scenes that make us uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I want to talk more about gangs, because this is really an area of expertise for you. You've also co-written a nonfiction book about reducing gang violence. And so I was interested if you have thoughts about what the general public thinks about gang violence, and if you feel as though we have some misconceptions about it.
I just think it comes out of lack of opportunity, gang membership, lack of opportunity, and a lot of times really sad upbringings that drive people into that, young people. into a sense of belonging in the gang. And the thing that drives that gang is that sense of belonging and community. It becomes a surrogate family. So it tends to be people who join gangs don't really have a strong family or a lot of, role models or, just, a strong family unit. And they become, they seek that belonging and being a part of something bigger than themselves in this gang. And of course, once you get into it, it's very difficult to get out. And, they get used, the young kids get used as, drug mules or selling. They get very little money, but they get something out. There's something else that drives staying in that gang and doing what the shot caller tells them to do. And that's being accepted and being valued and gaining status in the community in some way. So I think that's any gang prevention and intervention model has to address that psychological need.
I see. So in your book, you talk about using gang members as ways of combating violence. So, tell me how that works.
Yeah, it's the concept of gang intervention. So it's using former gang members or usually older guys who've dropped out and women, who've sort of come to their senses and have lived through a lot. And now they sort of actively work with youth to get them out of gangs, or just to simply tamp down the violence, which is driven by a cycle of retaliation. You did this to me, so I'll do that to you. Okay, I'll get back. And really, looking at this whole, things like in what is going on in the Middle East and Ukraine. I mean, it's the same concept. You shoot a missile over my border. I'm going to do it back to you. Okay, then I'm going to do it back to you. I mean, it's the same concept as gang violence. So I guess it's human nature. But these interventionists, sometimes they're called violence interrupters, they will come and try and head off, the cycle. So it's not, try and get them to empathize with the other side, see them as human beings. So one side sees the other as human beings, and different things like that.
Which actually, now that you're talking about it, definitely shows up in Skin of Tattoos, because Mag certainly understands that the other people who are in the rival gangs are kind of just in the same boat that he's in. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't help them, right? They're still caught in this cycle of, retaliation. Mm-hmm. And so he recognizes that, but it doesn't really help him, right?
No, because there's no way out. You've got to. It's like you're on that hamster wheel. You just how do you get? Where's the exit? You just keep going round and round. He wants to get out, desperately wants to get off the wheel, but he has a hard time finding what's the exit ramp. Where's that exit ramp? And that's his dream, is to have just a regular life. But as he said, I'm marked with these tattoos. This is going to be with me forever, kind of a thing. But you can get out of gangs, and people do, and lead successful lives. And some go into this gang intervention as a way of sort of redemption or giving back to the community, and helping others that are coming up behind them, to see that there's other ways to live and other options.
The other thing I thought you did really well was Mags, at the beginning of the book, Mags gets out of prison, and he wants to not go back to that gang life. I mean, it landed him in prison. So yeah, good thinking. Right. And so we as readers are the same, right? We're hoping, for him, we're rooting for him. And yet it only takes about 15 minutes before he's back with his members. And we understand it so completely as readers. Those are his friends, right? Mm-hmm. And so this idea of, telling people that they shouldn't go back to the gang is really pretty heartless, because those are his friends and they're likable people, right? So we like them too. And then it's just very understandable that of course he's going to hook up with them again, because they're his friends.
Yeah, where else is he going to go? That's his neighborhood. That's his home. He doesn't get a whole lot of acceptance. He goes back to his family. He's still the black sheep. His father still doesn't, sort of grunts at him. So where's he going to go? He's going to go back to his homies, because those are the guys that love him, and look up to him. Mm-hmm. And again, it's that psychological need. And then he gets drawn back into this rivalry with Rico, and again, that's an ego thing. His ego can't let Rico win, because Rico's now controlling, he's the shot caller. And, and Mag says that should have been me, that should have been me. And he can't let it go. And so that's his hubris that he falls victim to in the end. But so there's a lot of it's a complex issue that touches on many different things, the whole gang violence issue.
Do you feel as though we have misconceptions about that, or the way things are portrayed in the press, do you think are inaccurate in any ways? There are things that you'd want to set us straight on about gangs and gang life?
Well, just that, that they're often just really lost, sort of misguided youth. And there's a lot of different components to it. One is schools in a lot of urban neighborhoods are really terrible. They're really, I've been in them, and they're not very good. They tend to not attract very good teachers, all that kind of thing. The home life is usually lacking. There's usually a lot of problems at home. There's not a lot of job opportunities in a lot of these neighborhoods. So where are kids going to go? They don't have a lot of role models telling them, oh, you should get an education, or, go to vocational, get community college, or junior college, or what have you. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of different factors in all this. And there's a lot of, they hang out on the street, so they get into trouble, with kids hanging out on the street, because there's not a lot of stuff they can do, recreation, things like that. So there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle.
Yeah, I'm curious. One thing that was interesting to me is the relationship with the home country, and that he doesn't know very much about El Salvador, and he's kind of learning about El Salvador through his parents' stories. So yeah, I was curious about when you'd worked with the people who had been deported, if also there were comments that you wanted to make about immigration and deportation that we might not know about.
Yeah, it just, it just affects a lot of families, when one person gets deported or whatever. Obviously people who commit crimes get deported. They lose their right to be in the country, and that's not unusual. I mean, that's pretty common around the world.
I see.
What is uncommon with the United States is in a lot of countries you get banned from a country for, say, 5 years, 10 years, and then you can come back. Here, once you get deported, it's for life. So you can never come back. So there are a lot of different takes on it. It does separate families and whatever, but there isn't a sort of a rational aspect to it, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know that deportation was for life, whereas not so, and not the same in other countries. Just kind of interesting, because I think a lot of these crimes are committed when people are fairly young.
Yeah, well, the U.S. has a much more punitive type of justice system than many other countries, especially, developed countries around the world. So it tends to take a much harsher look at, you could get deported for drunk driving, mm-hmm. things like that. So mm-hmm. petty things. Yeah, so there's it does seem harsh at times, yeah.
All right, so as a writer, what's next for you?
This year I've been working on a lot of short stories, actually. I've been going through a lot of old stuff and sort of recycling a lot of things as short stories, a lot of coming out as noir and crime stories. So I've had a few publications, got a few things coming up on that. And then I have to get back to a mystery novel that I've got a draft of sitting there. So I sort of had to leave it alone for a while. So I've been working on other stuff since then, just shorter stuff, which is nice because, when a novel is just, there's such big, unwieldy projects, short story is like, oh, I've finished. Uh-huh. You get more of a sense of accomplishment.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you can see. Yeah, I agree. That's been my experience so far. Just trying to work on a novel it is a huge project management issue to work mm-hmm, on a novel. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is unlike the other kinds of writing that I've done. Yeah, it's a thing. Mm-hmm. All right. So thank you so much again for taking the time to talk with us today and for writing the books. I've enjoyed them very much. And before I let you go, is there anything you'd like to share with the audience?
Just so you can find me on the web at ChristinaHoag.com. All my books are available as audio books as well. I've got some good narrators. Yep, they're all on Audible. I have my latest work actually is called I Am the Famous Carlos, the story of Carlos the Jackal, the world's first celebrity terrorist. It covered a lot of his story as a reporter, and so I had all this research on him. So I wrote a sort of a novelized, I say it's a novel because it's kind of dramatized in areas. So, but it's all based on true, and I had a great time researching that, talking about research. But so that was a really fun project. I got going, was it late last year or early this year? I can't remember. No, late last year.
All right. So I'll put your website in the show notes too, so that people can find that. But let's keep in touch, and let me know what you're up to, and maybe we can bring you back on the podcast again sometime.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to support us, we'd welcome your donation on Venmo or PayPal or whatnot. Links are in the show notes or on our website, Books, Shows, Tunes, all one word, .discreetguide, all one word.com, under the support tab. And hey, while you're there, drop us a line and tell us what you thought of the episode. We'd love to hear from you. Books, Shows, Tunes, and Mad Acts is brought to you by The Discreet Guide, the coaching and training company for improving your speaking and writing skills, with a special focus on mastering English, career advancement, and executive presence. Let's get you to where you want to go. Lastly, a shout out to Podomatic, our great podcast hosting platform, and to Quincas Moreira for the theme music.